Welcome to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where we feature top leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry with your host, Drew Hendricks. Now, let's get started with the show.
Drew Thomas Hendricks here. I'm the host of the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. On this show, I talk with leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry. Today, we have a meadery on the show, and we're going to learn a lot about that coming up. But today's episode, it's sponsored by Barrels Ahead. At Barrels Ahead, we work with you to implement a one-of-a-kind marketing strategy, one that highlights your authenticity, tells your story, and connects you with your ideal customers. In short, we help wineries and craft beverage producers unlock their story to unleash their revenue. Go to barrelsahead.com today to learn more. Today, I am super excited to talk with Michael Fairbrother. Michael is the founder and head mead maker at Moonlight Meadery in Londonderry, New Hampshire. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Drew, thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you so much for being on. So, Michael, you're one of the OGs in the mead world.
Not quite the original.
Not back to Chaucer and Canterbury Tales, but in modern mead history. Talk to me. How'd you get into this?
So I started homebrewing back in 1995, and it took me a few years to figure out what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do what I became known for. But I started with beer, and then I started making cider, and it was July of 1995 where somebody offered me a mead. I had no idea what a mead was, but I didn't want to embarrass myself and say that. So I passed my glass over. Mm-hmm. If you've ever seen a little baby try something it loves for the first time and see its eyes pop right up with a big smile, well, that was my reaction. I looked at this guy. I said, "What is this?" He said, "An apple mead." I'm like, "What's mead?" He said, "A wine made from honey." And I'm like, "How do you make wine from honey? Because honey doesn't go bad." He said, "Well, you dilute it with apple juice or water or whatever you want to use, and you can then add yeast and it'll ferment like a wine." And I got pretty good at it. So in 2010, I quit my day job and started this company, and we sold just over 3.5 million bottles in the last 12 years. And I've been flown all over the world to talk and present about mead. I've taught at the Robert Mondavi Institute at UC Davis. I do what I love and love what I do. And it's amazing to see customers' reaction because they think mead's going to be super sweet. Yeah. And it can be sweet and it can be dessert-like sweet, but it doesn't have to be. So we've been known, and we've won Mead Maker of the Year or Grand Champion at the international competitions in San Diego with our meads. And, we've won medals every single time we've entered a competition. So it's really, for me, about the process and thoughts and making something great. And we distribute in 38 states in this country, have exported to Australia, Japan, Hong Kong, Canada. So it's a burgeoning market, and it's a lot of work is what it comes down to.
Oh, I can only imagine. So what was your day job before you?
I was a chief technical officer of a software company. So I worked my way from software engineering up into executive management. And this will now be my 20th year of management of teams. So a lot easier managing winemakers and mead makers and brewers than software engineers, but it's all the same thing: quality in, quality out.
Yeah, I can imagine on that. So you started as I always wonder. So you started as a home brewer and then moved towards the winery side and the fermentation side of honey. What excited you about mead?
So I'm a huge beer fan, and I've been to
you got a brewery as part of it too, which we'll get into.
Yes. So the what excites me about fermentation and the skills of fermentation is it's all very similar, but it's all unique, and the smallest magnitude of changes may go from average to exceptional. And so when I was thinking about what do I want to do and start a brewery, I'm like, there's so many great breweries out there. How can I differentiate myself? And at the time, there weren't so many great meaderies or any real meaderies to speak of. And so I said, well, if I'm going to do something, do it not in the most crowded field.
Mhm.
And so that's why we chose Mead. And now we've broken into cider, hard cider, and beer as well. But our beer, we're only going to sell here at our farmstead. So it's kind of, we're going for a destination location. So we've got a 100-acre farmstead. I can see, 45 miles, 270-degree view from the dining room or currently in my office. And it's the end consumer, right? So it's that look on the customer's face and making something nobody's ever had before and making something really well is really what's motivated me over the last 12, 13 years now commercially.
Oh, for sure. Now, like over the last 13, 14 years as you're kind of building up Moonlight Meadery, how is that? Was New Hampshire, did it already have sort of a large kind of mead
No.
enjoyment population? Like how has mead as a category evolved over the last 14 years?
Yeah, so when I started, there were 50 meaderies in the country, and now there's over 500.
Wow.
So it's pretty significant. The number of people that have taken my story and tried to see, oh, if Michael Fairbrother can do it, we can do it. And there are several great meaderies that are coming along behind me. But that's why I've taught and helped build a class at UC Davis, which was to really kind of, the better the mead is in the industry, the better my company will do, right? So it's a tough sell when you're walking into a store in St. Petersburg, Florida, and they're going, well, we've had mead, but we don't like it. And I'm like, well, you haven't had mine.
Yeah.
So then I give them a taste and I go, okay, this is different, right? And that's this past February, I was teaching in Warsaw, Poland, to a international group of mead makers and talking about balance of flavor and what makes that difference, what makes a mead go from good to great. Right. And how do you manage that? And how do you talk about that? How do you consistently plan for that? And all that has got to do with that, like I said, that smallest delta of things to really, anybody can make wine, right? You take some grapes and you ferment it, but is it good? You might be able to get your friends to drink it, but will people pay for it? And is it just a label? Is it pricing? What really makes people come back? And, what we have is consistency in sales, right? So we see that consumer coming in time and time again. And what they've come to know and to expect about us is that consistent flavor, that consistency of quality, and that we don't try to be the cheapest meat in the marketplace, but we try to be the best. And, that you have to, as a business owner, define what you want to be and why, and then drive towards that, right? So how do you consistently be the best? Well, it's in quality of ingredients. It's measuring every aspect of what's going on. So we have, tools in or measuring devices in our fermenters so that we know what temperature things are fermenting at, what's the degree of attenuation, how is this all happening real time, what's the CO2 producing, so we can measure every single aspect and know knowledge is power, and here's why this matters so much.
Yeah, you start with the science, then you can actually do the art.
Well, I started the other way. I started with the art, and then I finally became a scientist to say, okay, well, if I'm not the guy doing it every single time, how do I train my staff to do this consistently for me? Because I'm trying to really push myself up the food chain to just manage the business, not managing the fermentation.
So as you go out and you're teaching at UC Davis and all these classes, what advice do you give the new fledgling meadery on how to promote themselves and actually get a foothold in the marketplace?
So they've got to be able to be the best and know what the best is and taste that, right? So, I've been a beer, mead, and cider judge for the last 28 years now. So it's tasting a lot of really bad mead and knowing why a bad mead is where it is, because it's the smallest, I'll keep going back to this, the smallest delta to know where you're at and where you're trying to go to, and what does it take to fix that.
I've had my share of good mead and my share of pretty not so great mead, and I can get, what in your opinion, what's the biggest flaw in mead? When people go, it's just not for me.
Yeah, temperature control, fermentation. So the right amount of yeast, the right type of yeast, and how you're balancing that acidity and the sweetness and the alcohol. Because there's a perception of sweetness, which really goes a long way towards giving the end consumer balance, right? So even if it's a sweet mead like our Kurtz apple pie, the tartness from the apples that we're using give it that balance, and that 14% ABV also plays into that the smallest microbes of or pieces of trying to make it all a well-balanced piece. But I don't try to make it taste like apple pie, like cramming down the spices into it. It's light, and so by using as little as I can, the average consumer, when they taste it, they taste the spices, but they taste the apple and the honey, and it represents an apple pie in their mind. But if I made it taste like apple pie just to me, then it may not taste the same to everybody else who tries it. So, that's how we've gotten that one to be, one of our best sellers, with, the National Honey Board ranking it the 15th most influential honey beverage over the last 200 years. Is, that's it. You can't, when you're trying to make something amazing, you have to take yourself out of the equation. You can't just make it for you. You have to make it for a really broad audience. And that doesn't mean dumbing it down, but it means sticking to something and believing in it in a way that you've never thought possible. I mean, we make a barrel-aged mead that's been aged for 10 years.
That's the Utopia X.
Yes.
I ask you about that in the category.
Yeah, so that one is our most expensive mead, and it's our most awarded mead that we've made. So we've released 10 batches of this mead over the last 10 years.
And each one was aged 10. Yeah, so it's 10 years in old Samuel Adams.
Yeah, the latest release was 10 years in the cask. Next one will be year 15, so it'll be 15 years in the Utopia's cask from Samuel Adams. And then our final release will be year 20, so 20 years in the cask. So this is a mead that I do not touch. I do not disturb, and it's where sleeping dogs lie, you do not disturb type of thing.
It's almost like a whiskey release. You battled it, so you put it in the cask 10 years ago, and now you're releasing a certain number of casks every year.
Every 5 years.
Every 5 years. Wow.
Yeah, and we've almost sold out. We've released 1,000 bottles at $250 a bottle, and we're down to I think it's 250 bottles left at this point in time.
Wow.
So it's but as Jim Cook, founder of Samuel Adams, sent me an email one night many years ago now. He said, "Michael, I shared a bottle of your mead with my wife, and I got to tell you, big improvement on wine. All the best, Jim." Now, I looked at that email and I said to my wife, "What's it take for a billionaire to send me an email?" Right? And he's never going to tell me it's better than beer. So that was as close as I could get, and they've been really great to help us along the way. I've won the Samuel Adams Brewing the American Dream. I think it was back in 2011, 12, somewhere around that time. But I've always started my career as being a fan of craft beverages, and that's what's gotten me here, which is knowing that craft can be more than just beer. It can be mead and cider and wine and everything else in between. And how do you capitalize on that, right? So I paid attention to every little detail in the world since I was a little kid, right? When Wrigley's gum went from 7.6 to 5, I paid attention. When Smart Food popcorn came out in 1987, they gave every kid in college a free bag of popcorn. The popcorn in 1980s was this day glow orange stuff that nobody would ever give to anybody. And here comes Smart Food saying, well, we're going to change that trend and we're going to give everybody a free bag. And it was tasty, and it was natural, and it was great. And they sold that company for $1 billion. And when Ben and Jerry's wanted to start their company, a half gallon of ice cream was like $1.29, and they wanted to sell a pint of ice cream for $3.50. So how do you take half the size for twice the price, or quadruple the price based on that size, and succeed? And what they knew is make it about the flavor, right? Make it about consistency and quality and amazement, and everything else will come together. And so when I started my company, everything I did was about, not worrying about the gasoline or the cash to drive the business, but, take the car or the company where I wanted to go. And that's how I view money, which is money is to a company like gasoline is to a car. You can't go far without it, but you definitely don't. It's not the reason I'm here. The reason I'm here is because I want to make great product and see that expression on people's faces. And that's why we started our new farmstead, which is, this 100-acre, middle of nowhere in New Hampshire location. But, if you look at destination brewery locations across New England, you got Hill Farmstead, you got Trillium Treehouse. Well, I'm building the first one in New Hampshire, which is Hidden Moon Brewing at Over the Moon Farmstead. And so we've really kind of never let anybody tell you where you can go. Define where you want to go and figure out how to do it. And that's what I've been the best at, which is I solve problems, right? So if I would listen to everybody that told me I couldn't do this, so you would first ask, well, was New Hampshire this mecca of mead? No, there was no meaderies. There was one that was going out of business, and I bought all their equipment, and the liquor commission here in town, in the state, laughed at me and said, "Don't ever quit your day job. You never sell a bottle." And they're one of my biggest customers in the country. So it's the success of a small business owner in any craft industry is based on perseverance. Right? So never giving up, always understanding what your story is and how to make that story stand out, and understand what makes you different. So what I was good at is understanding it's about the experience. It's about getting customers into my shop and understanding, how to give them the value of a tour and tasting without losing my shirt, whether it's with Groupon or Living Social back in the day, and driving that. So when our average customer came into our gift shop, they spent about $65 a couple. And so, that was a real strong data indicator for me to say, okay, I can work with Living Social and Groupon to come in and do tours, but how do I create perceived value so that when you discount perceived value, you're not discounting and going out of business. You've essentially figured out the magic sauce to it. And when they wrote a book on Groupon, they included me in their book and said, we like what you've figured out, and we want to tell our customers about this and why this works. Because let's say you had a restaurant and I was giving away a free slice of pie with every Groupon customer that came in. That's real value, right? So, if you discount real value, you lose money.
Yes,
right?
But I think was the big mistake people made there.
Yeah, well, and you can't overcome it because there's real costs associated. But for us, we were happy to do tours and tastings, and we used to do them for free, but we switched the model to doing them for a price, and the customers got that perception of value because we were spending one-on-one time with them. We were giving them a great tour, building them into our story, letting them become part of what we were doing, and it didn't really cost me anything. And at the end of the day, I made money. So we went from a free tour and tasting to essentially Groupon cuts the price in half. So a $50 tour and tasting for two becomes $25. Of that $25, we get $12.50. So $12.50 to start with over zero is a significant amount of money compared to zero. And then those customers would spend $65. So here I am bringing in $72.50 per couple that they delivered to my doorstep each and every time. And that's why we were able to make that a really successful venture for us. And now that we have this farmstead with this epic view and hiking trails and everything else.
Yeah, when did the farmstead come online?
So this officially this spring. So May of this year, we now have year-round capacity. We're working on the restaurant. The restaurant should be open. It's going to be a beehive to bistro, as my wife likes to call it. And it should be 100-person venue. We're working on a wedding venue as well, so we'll have up to 200-person wedding and
that's great. You can handle some events too as well.
Yeah, we've got 100 acres. I got a lot.
You can do a
lot of things. And then we'll be moving our winery or meadery and brewery up here from Londonderry So this, and what I've paid in rent over the last 12 years in Londonderry would have bought this property for cash. So it's
Wow.
understanding.
What's happening on the other 100 acres? Is there crops or?
Yeah, we have hay, apples, cultivated blueberries and raspberry bushes, some wild blackberry bushes. But we'll eventually probably put in more apple trees as we continue to grow. But we're up on top of this hill, so we can see from at least a 45-mile view from north to south in New Hampshire, which is pretty just breathtaking to see.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, that would be great. So then eventually, do you envision most of the fruit going into your meads and your ciders coming from the farmstead?
I would say some, not
Some.
most.
Yeah.
So we're pretty large scale these days. I mean, our typical cider purchase is about 7,000 gallons.
Okay. So maybe your artisanal releases.
Yeah, we might have some farmstead or heritage releases that we do, but we tend to here's another lesson for any of your business folks that are trying to manage their companies. You have to put quality first, right? So local doesn't mean the best. The best means the best, right? So if local is the best, that's what you want to use. But I don't do anything based on cost per se. I try to find the best quality first, right? Because if it's cheap and it's garbage, it's not going to do you any good, right? No. So you need quality ingredients to make quality mead, cider, and beer, and that means bar none. That's where you have to start. And so if you also find local that can fill that need and has that quality, perfect. But if not, then do not bank on that, right? So that's the one thing I really try to stress with people is to know your quality first and then local. Like we used to make a certified organic mead, and then our local agency here in the state of New Hampshire dropped their certification process. So we ended up giving up our certification. It turns out not a lot of customers buy organically certified alcohol. It's just not the right marketing endeavor for people that want organic, right? And it's not to say there aren't some, but there's no cost value justification on a high-end product or high expensive product like what we make to make that work for everybody.
Yeah, I think I mean, in the wine category, like with a grape wine, you do see that whole organic quality, but there's such a large category, it can segment down to that section versus like mead. Like over the last 14 years with distribution and seeing mead categorize itself on the big box store shelves, how have you seen that evolved, and how do you see it moving forward? So is it a category on the beer? Is it a category on the wine? Where do they stock it?
Yeah, a lot of the bigger box stores, the national chains that we deal with, put us in the dessert wine section.
Yeah,
which is really hard for us because the craft wine buyer is not anywhere near as venturous as craft beer buyer. So the best product placement we've seen market after market is in the craft cider or craft beer section of the store, because those buyers are tending to look for something new. Whereas the wine buyer is really kind of focused on what they're heading after. They may want mead and they may trip onto the mead section, but the craft beer buyers are looking for any new labels. And, I've done so many podcasts over the years with the various homebrewing and brewing and networking shows that you really kind of focus. And that's why I've gotten to where we've gotten to, with 38 states of distribution. We've seen sales in certain markets grow 500% over a given year. And then they turn around, open up the market to a lot more meaderies because they see it's a new category and they want everybody. And then my sales plummet and everybody's like, well, see, your sales not so strong. And I'm like, well, it was before you just dropped the bottom out of behind us. So it's, but we do so much business with like Total Wine and More across the country, Whole Foods and Trader Joe's and such, that they bring a really strong, consistent market base to us, and they're pretty consistent at how to present and like for a Trader Joe's, for example, we don't do tastings in their stores. They don't allow us to. But they're one of my biggest customers here in New Hampshire. And it's every week, order after order. So there are customers buying everything I make consistently at these stores. So it's, how do I then turn around and go talk to like a state like Tennessee or wherever and say, Ohio and Iowa, here's a working model. What do we need to do to help bring that to you? And with a small team like we have, pre-COVID, I used to travel the country. My son runs sales and marketing. He traveled the country. My wife was also in the sales and marketing department. She traveled the country. Well, and now it's pretty much, none of us are traveling. So how do we continue that? And, the biggest states for us in sales are Florida, Texas, and California. And, what makes those states special? It's the population, right? And it's the consistency of the quality of the product that we make that keeps our sales numbers high. But the further I get away from New Hampshire, the better I'm known in the mead world as doing something amazing. But local, I'm considered local, and everybody goes, local's not so good. So
I see that.
What do you bring into the table? And I'm like, well, I do pretty good numbers. And so then I talk about what the grocery stores here in New Hampshire do. And, we can sell at grocery stores, liquor stores, and small craft beer stores. And, we make different products for different markets, right? So if you want to get our products like our Utopian X at, a store, you got to go to New Hampshire liquor stores. If you want to get it from us, we carry it. But, the major grocery stores carry 6 SKUs, and then everybody else carries everything in between. So I've really tried to think about segmenting my markets and my products based on the needs of my customers, right? And so it's not easy to do that. No. And it's a lot of money sitting on a shelf sometimes, but it's, if the store that's down the street carries everything I make, then why would the little craft beer store carry anything I make? Right. Because the bigger the box store, the lower the price point usually, because they can make it up on steak and eggs and everything else. So I've had to think about what goes into a market and why I can't undersell those accounts, because if I undersell them, then nobody's going to come to them to buy product. They'll come to me. But I can't be running the store 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So, there's value add to not being the cheapest and making not making, but giving your customers a reason to go buy it consistently from these stores, and maybe bump into somebody else when they're in that store and say, hey, have you tried this? This is pretty amazing. This is from Moonlight Meadery, and I love that they're local here in New Hampshire, and yada, yada, yada. But, when I get to Washington State, or we're in Washington State, I can't go do that. I can't, so it's now my distributors who can do that, right? And think about, all right, well, they're making this for bars. They're making this for these Apple-only cider bars. They're making this for this market. They're making this for the Total Wines and More. They're making this for the BevMos. It's...
So you've segmented your product to the different distribution channels.
Yeah, that's exactly right, it's not easy, right?
Yeah, no, that's a tremendous... And I really like that, because I come from the small independent wine store, was where I got my start in the wine industry. And I was always looking for that product that isn't going to compete with BevMo, that isn't going to be in Costco or Safeway. So for me, that was particularly appealing.
Well, it's attractive to try to think about how do you survive in the big box stores. But then you got to realize how many there are, and what about all the stores that don't fit that category, right? So, as a previous software engineer, I think of problems in a very dynamic space, and I try to think about how do I work with a small boutique store, right? And then how do we work with tastings in boutique stores, and what's the cost sharing revenue system going to look like if they're going to sample out bottles of our meads? So like if you were to go to Disney World and go to a Savannah Bee and come in and try my mead, well, we're helping to make sure that they can do those samples, customers try the mead, and then they buy it. And it's liquid to lips is kind of a industry term. And I was in Australia once doing a tasting, and this gentleman who owned multi-bar thing in Sydney, he said, Michael, he said, if your product sucked, you would never go far. He said, but your product's amazing. Your labels at the time, this was like 10 years ago, could use some help. But he said, you can fix your labels, you can't fix your product. So this is your strength, right? Which is, it's always been about liquid, and understanding what makes it taste good and why, and how to consistently drive, trying to encourage customers to taste it. Whether we've done tasting events, I've literally traveled the whole country and done these events. And it's that expression when you see somebody try something for the first time, the eyes light right up. It's that simplicity. And this is what I see in my tasting room day after day, right? So I don't have to go far to see it anymore. But there's a reason we can do this consistently, and it's that care and attention, because you can't fake that sincerity that is required to get to this level of success.
Sure. No, it can't fake the sincerity, and it can't fake motivation. How do you stay motivated over all these years?
That fear of failure is a fear of failure is a never-ending devil on my shoulder. I've worked my life to get to where I've gotten to, and I keep taking on more and more challenges because of I believe in what I'm doing. And the hardest part for me to start my company was to start the company. But once I started the company, I looked back at myself and I said, what was I so afraid of? I was afraid of, did I have the courage to do this? And now I look at myself and I'm going, why be afraid? Why think you're going to fail? You've done so much to get to here. And it's not everybody has that skill. And there are a lot of people that will fail and have failed. And, I think I'm lucky at being lucky. And, that
or
drive,
problem solving, as you're saying, because a lot of the people stick to a plan and they fail to deviate from the plan or solve the problems that are unexpected.
Yeah. You have to know how to, deviate when required, but not when maybe wanted. Right. So there's do you need something, or do you want something, or do you have to have it, type of thing. And for us to branch into making hard cider, it seemed like logical. I mean, I was making apple meads. Apple mead is a cider. A cider is essentially a strong apple cider. So how can I not make those? And now my cider is my number one selling item. And we've learned our lessons the hard way. I mean, making a 14% alcohol mead versus a 6.5% cider presents a whole new level of challenges, from stabilization and making sure you're not creating bottle bombs or other problems that will lose your market share.
I had a bottle bomb just last week from a cider company that I'm a member of. I opened the cap, the thing hit the roof.
Yeah, that's well, and you got to be it's a lot of lessons learned the hard way. I mean, I used to run Mead for Die, which is a homebrew competition. And I was opening some packages and I put a bottle on the table, and I just happened to turn around to get the next bottle, and the bottle exploded and glass went 20 feet around me. And I was lucky I wasn't looking at that bottle, because I wasn't smart enough to put on safety goggles or anything, and I probably would have gotten some glass in my eyes, and that could have been the end of my vision. So
no, were you expecting to have safety goggles just handling bottles?
Yeah, well, there's you never know.
At a homebrew, you might need the safety goggles.
Yeah, it's so we stopped that year. The Liquor Commission was frowning upon us trying to run these evaluations, and considering the hazards and whatnot. It's even when fans and whatnot want to produce stuff and send it to me for evaluation, it's kind of like, well, I don't know if that's too smart of an idea. What do I know about who's making this and who they are and what their intent is? And
Mhm.
I mean, I want to believe everybody has the best of intentions, but it's clear not everybody always has that. So it's why take unnecessary risks when you don't
Yeah.
have to?
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. So it's kind of a step back or maybe forward. Talking about Moonlight Meadery and your, how would you characterize your house style in the scope of mead? I know it's a very rare from dry to sweet, but there is sort of a house
So,
style.
14% are nominal average alcohol base, and then from there, it's because I think of yeast as my canvas to which I create my flavors from.
Mhm.
So I've really worked with Lavalin 71D, which is a white wine yeast,
Okay.
Narbonne, France. And it's the yeast I use on pretty much everything we make, cider and mead wise, because I know what it likes. I know what it wants. I know
Uh-huh.
the temperature it ferments at very nicely, and I can get it to perform exactly like I want every single time. So the house brand is really consistent,
Mm-hmm.
and so we have windows of maybe lower pH and higher acidity and sweetness levels and
Mm-hmm.
such, but we can get in the window. And I've told many people that we don't try to make the same batch every single time, but we try to make it excellent every single
Mm-hmm.
time. And
Sure.
that depends on knowing that range of, all right, well, if it's a little bit sweeter but it's a little more acidic, that balances, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you can balance, you can create that perception and that flavor. And sometimes our ingredients change pretty significantly out from under us.
Mm-hmm.
So what might look dark purpley red raspberry color one year might look lighter the next, and it's a question of what do you do now? Right? So customer's going to pour it into their glass, they go, that doesn't look like the last one I remember, and then they're going to taste it, and then if you can kind of come close, they go, okay, that's close enough, that's what I remember. But to know, I mean, imagine you're ordering a black and tan or American pale ale, and you get something that looks like a stout, right? So your eyes are going to go, that is not what I'm ordering. But whether it's raspberry or blueberry or something else with honey, that can happen, right? That those shifts can be pretty significant. And from my perception, side of the fence, I'm looking at, okay, we're using the same source supplier, we're using the same quantities, but we go from this dark mahogany color to this light pink color, and what do I tell everybody, right? Like, how do I justify that? And the reality is everything's up for grabs. You have no control over a lot of this stuff. And the bigger the house is, I mean, we're not maybe the largest meadery in the country, but we're up there. I mean, we sell, I don't know, 100,000 plus bottles, maybe 200, 300,000 bottles a year.
Pretty
So
big production to ramp up in 10 years or 12, 14 years.
yeah, so it's our biggest batch sizes are 3,100 gallons. So that's 3,100 gallons or 31,000 bottles at a time. So those are big numbers. Yeah. But you can't just make them and get them in a warehouse. You gotta make them and make sure they get pulled from the distributor's warehouse onto a store, or from the store into the consumer's enjoyment, and keep going. It's the hardest part when you're trying to plan for growth is you have no idea you can't push the market, right? You can't push product through the market. You gotta hope you've gotten enough fans and customers that are walking in. And mead sales are nothing like beer or wine sales. It may take a while to have it pull through the market. And then
Yeah, and do you think that talk about sales and how they got to pull it through the market? All the new categories of kombucha and seltzer and all that's stemming out of the craft brew. Is mead taking a little bit of is it getting a tailwind from all this, with people more experimental and looking for more natural beverages?
Well, I think so. That's why I suggested that the craft beer segment or the cider segment is the right location for it to fit on the shelves, because no wine buyer is looking for kombucha, right? Like, it's very rare that somebody's looking for a Chardonnay, and They're just tripping over a kombucha and saying, that's what I wanted, right?
I came for a Chardonnay and left with a
I mean, I guess I could be proven wrong. It could happen. But whereas the craft beer buyers have been really taught brand loyalty is not such a amazing thing anymore, right? So they've been taught, look for new labels, think about the newest thing. Is it a double hazy IPA with lime and guava and everything else that could be in there? Or, and that's why my brewery side of my house is, making beer to taste like beer. We don't want to follow in those footsteps. I mean, we do have some IPAs, we have 3 on tap right now out of the 15. But, I've been in craft beer bars that have like 8, 10 IPAs, and you're like, well, what's left? Whereas we want to have a Scotch ale, a porter, mild, a wee heavy, and everything else in between.
Yeah, you got to talk to half the breweries here in Vista, where I live in San Diego. They're slowly evolving, and we're having pilsners, we're having lagers, we're having a broad selection. But over the last 10 years, you'll go in there and you're right. There's like a dozen IPAs. Or variations of the IPA, and I've got a pretty good palate, but there's a lot of more similarities than differences between those 8.
Yeah, I've got a lot of friends in the craft beer industry, and Tommy Nickel, who owns O'Brien's out your way, and Nickel Brewing Company, and big fans of Pizza Port and everybody else. Okay. So we've my beer fandom goes back 27 years now. And, I want beer to just take me by the heart and soul and just sing to me. Right. And that's really kind of why, I thought there were too many good breweries to start a brewery 12 years ago. But, now that I've got the wherewithal to change the world here, I can make the beers I want to make, and customers are coming, right? So we had our first year mug club, and we sold out before June, and next year we'll triple the size of that. So it's people want something good, right? And it's not always the skill. And I'm not trying to poo-poo the people that make Skittles beers and whatever else that comes down the pipeline. But I think there's a reason why, if you go to Germany up into Bavaria and you find these breweries that have been there for thousands of years, why they make beer that's just mind-blowingly delicious. And I'm like, okay, this is what triple decoction does for you, and why. And this is why melanoidins matter in the flavor profile of a good dark malty lager. And this is why I brought bottles home to give to my brewmaster to say, I want beer to taste like this, right? Like I want to just sit back and say, yeah, give me a liter of a dunkel, and I want to just sit back on a beautiful fall day and just enjoy this thing. Okay, I don't need to drink 20 of them. I just want to drink one and have it be the best in the world. And that's so I've gotten to the affordability in life that I can put my persuasion into what I want to create and why. And this is so another tip for any meaderies or brewers that are coming along the pipeline: don't chase the crowd, right? Understand why you're doing what you're doing and stick to it. You got to be good. That's a requirement. But if you are good and you can consistently make great beer or mead or cider, don't chase the tail, right? Don't chase that ball coming down the soccer field. Know your position, play it well. And this is why I'm not trying to make beer and sell across the market. It's the never ending battle between shelf space. If I can barely keep the shelf space for the mead I want to keep in the marketplace, and we're considered one of the best in the world, why do I want to try to do the same with beer, where it's in the Budweiser Miller Coors interest to prevent me from succeeding?
Sure.
Right? They literally have lobbyists at every state house and representation to prevent little guys from getting an even shake. So if that's the case, how do I control that? And that's why I said we're going to have a destination location. We'll sell the beer here, nowhere else. And if you want it, you come. And if you don't, that's okay too.
That's a wise go-to-market strategy, for especially having that location and building off of the brand you built with Moonlight Meadery.
Yeah, it's taken us for what seems like forever. My wife has driven me around the country looking at properties for 12 years, and I stumbled upon this one on Google, and I wasn't even sure where Pittsfield was located in my state. And I was like, okay, 13 miles from the capital. That's not so bad. And then I got her out of bed and we drove up, and the real estate agent wouldn't even show us the property because she was busy. And we parked along the road and walked past the house to the mailbox and back and took photos. And I knew 30 seconds in, I said, everything that's wrong with this house, I can fix. And we've sunk a lot of money in at this point, but exterior roof siding, installation's all done. Restaurant's nearing completion. We're getting our final inspections in another week. We're working to hire chefs and
awesome
and line cooks at this point. So
when's the plan to come online?
I'm going to say Columbus Day, but it might be a little later than that. But our model that I'm trying to go for is kind of like a really great pizza, like a pizza port type of deal, or mellow mushroom, with a gastropub. So full spectrum, but not just pizzas. And you got to drive about 30-40 miles from my location to find a decent pizza, and we have a lot of high-end tourists in the area that have their second or third homes in the area, and they have money. They have a lot of money. And so we don't have to, just deal to the locals that are trying to get by, but we want to make amazing food. And what we've seen consistently is if you make it amazing, you can control your price point. And then if you control your price point, you can actually make a successful business from it. So that's how I've run the company from day one. And that's why I continue to do so.
That's fantastic advice. And man, Michael, is there anything else that we haven't talked about as we kind of round down this episode?
No, this was great. I mean, if you ever want me back on, I'd be happy to.
I'd love to have you back on. The one thing I picked up on that I was going to mention, we were talking about your apple pie. The part that stuck in my mind, and maybe I misheard it, but the fact that you make the mead to embody the vision of what someone would have as an apple pie versus trying to make a mead taste like apple pie, it's going to fail.
Right. Well, it's the simplest of ingredients, right? So it's essentially Madagascar bourbon, vanilla beans, Vietnamese cinnamon, honey, and apple cider. Right. So we we dilute the honey with the apple cider, get it to ferment clean and consistent, and then we add the spices for almost 3 days at the end of the fermentation process. But a lot of homebrewers will think you have to add spices at the beginning, and then the CO2 scrubs out all the aromatics. So you need the aromatics, and that's why we use high grade vanilla and cinnamon. And then you get that taste. There's nothing like Vietnamese cinnamon in the world. And when you taste it, you could actually block your sense of smell, and you could still feel that sense of cinnamon come through. And there's no substitution for quality ingredients. You can't. I mean, vanilla beans cost me $17,000 for a 55-pound bag of vanilla beans. It's expensive, but you have to have it. There's nothing close to that flavor presentation, and customers will try my mead and say, "Man, I can almost taste the crust. Like, how do you get that flavor in there?" Right? Well, I don't. Your mind is connecting those dots.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, Michael, where can people find out more about you and Moonlight Meadery?
Yeah, our website, moonlightmeadery.com. We do ship to 38 states. So we have distribution to 38 states. But if you can't find us in your local stores, you can buy our meads and ciders online. If you're in New Hampshire or anywhere within the New England region, come to visit us at Over the Moon Farmstead.
Awesome. I can't wait till your thing comes online. And I got to try this Ethiopian accent. I'm looking at the store right now here. I may be shopping after the show. Well, awesome. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
Drew, my absolute pleasure. And, we'll do this again some point. Appreciate it.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.